into the stories of Samuel, when we've hit these stories of war and battle. So there will be some more stories of warfare and battle. And you know what? Some of them aren't even between the Israelites and the Philistines. So be watching for that too. But as much as we hate talking about wars and battles, these stories are there to kind of show right from wrong and nuance. And not everything is clear in the haze and the fog of battle. So our big theme in Samuel is having a moral compass in any time. And, orienting our compass toward kindness, which is also our theme, and just figuring things out. It's really hard. If it were easy to do, we wouldn't have to talk about it. So here we are in these war battle scenes. So you saw the fierce Philistines were, what is her name in real life? Her name is Phyllis, so that's what's going on there. Oh, right, but they really are called the Philistines, so it just kind of worked out today. So, we had this battle with the Philistines. We depicted over here a coastal people, and Israel pictured over here. They have at it. And in scene 1, the Philistines are actually winning. And the Israelites are kind of confused, like, what's going on here? And scratching their heads, what's our next strategy? So what was their great idea in the first part of the battle? What did they think would help them out? Let's drag in the Ark of the Covenant. That'll help us. So how did that plan go? Pretty much went south. What happened when they brought the ark into the battlefield? The Philistines were suitably afraid, but then what happened? They captured the Ark of the Covenant. I mean, that is just the worst scenario ever. That is just terrible. It's kind of morally reprehensible. Like, how could that happen? And what we read today was actually a synopsis of 1 Samuel 4 through a little chunk of chapter 7. So it's several chapters consolidated. So the parts of the scene that you didn't see depicted here today were that when Israel realizes that their precious Ark of the Covenant, which is their symbol of all their values, it has the 10 Commandments inside. It was seen as the seat of God, the presence of God. When this falls into Philistine hands, they are crushed. It is a horrible scenario. And gradually the word comes back through Israelite territory. And every place that the news is heard, they're just tearing their hair out going, oh, this is terrible. How could this possibly have happened? Finally, a messenger makes it back to Shiloh. And at Shiloh, there is the old priest that we met in earlier episodes. Do you remember his name? Eli. There's the old priest Eli. And when Eli hears about it, first, there's other bad news. With the ark, there are certain custodians, stewards of the ark, that took the ark into battle. And they were Eli's sons. And those names might be hard to remember. Anybody remember Eli's sons' names? Hophni and Phinehas. What kind of people were they? No good. Even though they lived at the temple and they dealt with holy things, they're no good. You can read chapters 1 and 2 and you can find out more about them. So Hophni and Phinehas are these people carrying the ark into battle. And what we also didn't say out loud in the depiction was that in battle, Hophni and Phinehas die in the battle. So, as one person in Bible study said this week, maybe that's not such a terrible thing. They were really no good scoundrels. So, Eli hears the news that his son dies. His sons die, and he's horrified by that. But what really gets him is that the ark is captured. He falls back he breaks his neck and he dies. So it's really terrible. Phinehas's wife hears her husband has died, and brother-in-law, father. But what really triggers things for her is when she hears the ark is captured. And apparently she's pregnant. She goes into early labor and delivers a baby. And the baby is named The Glory Is Gone. The Glory Is Gone. So it's a really horrible, terrible, awful thing to have the ark captured. Was it such a great thing for the Philistines to have the ark? Not so much. So even though they won that battle too, having the ark in their possession was also disastrous. So you saw how their Dagon, their deity, fell over a couple of times, and the added detail is they got a disease of some sort that involved tumors. Some theorize it was bubonic plague. So they got the plague, and then they're like, this Philistine city didn't want to have the Ark of the Covenant. They moved it to another one and to another one. And each Philistine city is like, no, thank you. No, we don't want the Ark here. And disease and plague followed it until finally they're like, we just need to shove off. We need to get rid of this. This is a bad thing. So they come up with a plan to somehow, they can't just ditch the Ark. They can't just drop it off anonymously. So they come up with a plan to get the ark delivered on a cart led by a cow and pushed in to Israelite territory, where it is received with great rejoicing. So the ark got back. So, do you think it was a good idea for the ark to go into battle? What do you think? Was that a good plan? How many think that was a good idea, taking the ark into battle? Anybody thinking that's a great idea? Anybody thinks kind of a bad idea? Okay. For those of you who think it was kind of a bad idea, any thoughts like, why was that a bad idea to take the ark into battle? Any thoughts? It didn't work. It didn't go well, did it? And sometimes in life, try again. We don't quite get things right. But in this case, I think the Bible is abundantly clear. That was a really terrible idea. It was a stinker of an idea. For whatever reason, and maybe it's because it's 4th of July weekend, prior to reading this story, I always try to read the Declaration of Independence and, think about that and do a little research about U.S. history and, just kind of remind myself of stories. And for whatever reason, this week I was reminded of something called the separation of church and state. So it's a huge topic, giant topic. So I will weigh in very carefully and just throw out some things that just kind of give us footholds. Because the separation of church and state is a big deal. It's a really big deal. So first of all, with the separation of church and state, it's actually not something that's literally in the Declaration of Independence, is what we celebrate July 4th, 1776, nor is it a literal phrase in our Constitution, which was put together a few years later, say 1787. So it's not a phrase literally in either of those historic documents that we look to. It originated, we think, with Thomas Jefferson and some writings of Thomas Jefferson. And other people wrote about it too. And Thomas Jefferson was probably influenced by John Locke. And, there are just a lot of writers and thinkers talking about things. So separation of church and state. So what about that? So one other place to go with that concept is in the Constitution, there's the First Amendment. So we all hear about First Amendment, but within the First Amendment is this thing called the Establishment Clause. And I've heard that and I was like, what does that mean exactly? So in the First Amendment, it says that the government or the country shall not establish a religion. There shall be no nationwide religion. There shall be no religion established. None. So there's got your government, and no religion is established by that government. And then the latter part of that phrase, so none shall be established, nor shall anyone be prohibited. People shall have freedom to practice their own religion. So I was looking at this again. I was looking at early history of the founding of what we now know as the United States. And there was a lot of different flavors of religion going on. So maybe one flavor of religion we hear a lot about, the Puritans. So the Puritans who came over, and we associate them with the Pilgrims and Thanksgiving, they were religiously persecuted. They left where they were, and they got bumped around several times. So when they came ashore to what we now know as the U.S., they were persecuted religiously. And then, okay, so you have that flavor of religion going on. You also, I had forgotten about this, like the establishment of Maryland was full of Catholic people. So first it was Catholic people, and then it kind of fell into Protestant hands. And then there was a little bit of skirmish going on between Protestants and Catholics, and some laws there kicked up some dust. Well, also in the mix, you remember William Penn and the Quakers? They had their own lane of religious understanding. And then someone I hadn't thought about in a while was Roger Williams. Anybody been to Rhode Island? So he was a founder of Rhode Island and Providence, and he was a person of religious conscience. So he was kind of persecuted for his ideas, and so got shoved off to Rhode Island. And then kind of some cousins of ours, the Dutch Reformed, they established a place called New Amsterdam. Do you know what New Amsterdam became? New York. So there were different flavors of religion, even if they're on the Christian spectrum going on. And they had been skirmishing before they even got to the new land to them. And I think they were recalling the horrible wars that had been going on back in the old country, back in the previous continent. And a lot of thinkers are like, having a country, a government, and having it have a religion, bound up in it at the same time just creates havoc. It is better to have your government and then have different people of conscience be free to practice their different flavors of faith. So that's what informed some of the founding of the U.S. And First Amendment. So kind of interesting to think about. So why go there in talking about this story today? I think that kind of the upshot of the story today is God saying, do not mess with me. It may look like the ark was just bad news for the Philistines, which it clearly was, but God is not to be trifled with by Hophni and Phinehas, who are trying to grab God and drag God into their battle that their power might be enhanced. God is having none of that. God is free from our human grabbiness, our human designs. God is free. God says, do not mess with me. I don't care who you are, Philistine or Israelite. Knock it off. There's another little story within chapter 6 When the ark comes back into what's Beth Shemesh, we didn't make a joke about that being Beth Shemesh. Beth was actually in Beth Shemesh, ironically. When the ark comes back there, there's another little story that there was a group of people that were Israelites associated with someone named Jeconiah. And they seemed kind of disrespectful of the ark, and they were kind of like smited. It's very rare I'll use the smite button here with you guys. We believe in a God of grace and love and many chances and redemption and all that. But, the smiting factor is there to warn us of our values and to warn us that God alone is holy. God is holy, and we are but human beings, and God is not to be trifled with. The ark is not to be trifled with. Israel is but a custodian of a revelation of God that got seen as 10 Commandments and put in the ark, and all the things there are pointing to the fact that God alone is holy. And humans are instructed by that. But woe to us if we drag God into our battles. Woe to us. That happens, doesn't it? In politics, in different things in life, in relationships, people drag God into it in order to enhance their power and control. Be aware. Be aware of that. I love the denomination that we come from, Presbyterian Church USA, and it has a robust and wonderful understanding of church and state and ethics, and a wonderful understanding of who God is. And just because we should be extraordinarily careful with God and God's stuff and what is holy, it doesn't mean that we are to remain silent either. So how do we practice our values, practice our religion in places where there's a lot of different views on things? How do we do that? Well, here's a good starting point, several points here. Back to what's inside the Ark of the Covenant again? What's in there? The 10 Commandments. So, 10 Commandments. First commandment, I alone am God, and you are not. The first commandment, God alone. There is one God. God is holy. Okay, that's commandment number 1. Got it, everybody? You are not God. God is God, and there's only one God. Second commandment, you shall not make an idol out of anything. Think of all the things we make idols out of, and it's not just some hokey Dagon thing. Anything that we value more than God is an idol. Anything. And then the third commandment, which I think is really appropriate for our text today. You shall not take my name in vain. So a lot of times, not taking the Lord's name in vain, we think what? Don't swear, right? It is so much more than that. God's name, not taking God's name in vain, is not abusing, not mishandling the things of God. Not taking the Lord's name in vain. And dragging the Ark of the Covenant into battle, thank you, Hophni and Phinehas, the no good sons of Eli. They are taking God's name in vain. So, what do? Do we just keep silent about our beliefs? Well, I was thinking there's 2 buckets of ways of being a person of faith. Bucket number 1, grabbing God's name to enhance and fluff your position. That's what some people of faith do. And using God's name to scare other people. And God is on my side. Oh, how dare you. And when you hear stuff like that, I want you to think that's how Hophni and Phinehas got smited by saying that, oh, God's on my side. Warning, There's that bucket of faithfulness. The other bucket is holy. Holy, humility. We don't drag God into our battles. We consult God through prayer, and we ask God for guidance, help. We also study the Bible and look at complicated stories and the whole realm of the Bible to get oriented, to get a compass. What are God's values? Some easy ones. Micah. What does Micah say? What shall we come before the Lord? Why are we here? To do justice, to love kindness, and to walk humbly with our God. Old Testament, New Testament, Matthew 25. That's where Presbyterians go, the last paragraphs of Matthew 25. When did I see you a stranger? When did I see you poor? When did I see you in prison? That's when we see God looking out for those who are oppressed. Humility, seeking God's help, and being oriented to the Lord Almighty. So it's 4th of July weekend. Let's have a blast celebrating our country, celebrating the good principles of our country. And at the same time, for those of us who are Christian, we have a higher power who is holy and is so beyond human power. To God be the glory. Amen.